Wrote this song while crewing Aaron on a 100-mile foot race through the trails in the rain and mud. How about that? One hundred miles to go. 100 miles to go. Don't ask me why I do it. I don't know. One hundred miles by foot. 100 miles by foot. Don't ask me why I do it. I can't stay put. Rain is a coming, can't give a fit. Rain is a coming, can't give a fit. Don't ask me why I do it, but I am legit.
Hello, I'd like to welcome back Jake Edmiston. He's our registered dietitian. He was on episode 8 with me, in which we talked about general nutrition for runners and athletes. So I wanted to invite Jake back on. We're going to talk today about intermittent fasting and fat adaptation, a little bit about ketogenic. He's my source to go to for my athletes. So I wanted to have Jake on again because a lot of times on podcasts, we hear from athletes that are ketogenic or fat adapted, but we don't technically hear from the experts that have had education. So, Jake, would you reintroduce yourself to the listeners for me, please?
Hi, yes. Thanks for having me, Aaron. I'm like you said, I'm Jake Edmiston. I'm a registered dietitian. I live out here in New Mexico. I've been practicing for some time yet, and I work a lot still with development disabled and long-term care, and then work with some of your athletes, and I got some gym athletes. So I got a pretty well-rounded in my verse of nutrition. So I like to stay on top of all the different trends and what's going on in the world. So.
And I certainly appreciate that, because when I ask Jake questions, he goes and looks for the research that's already been done and tries to find scientific backing as to the questions that I pose to him. So thanks for taking the time today, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll start with intermittent fasting. Let's start just with a basic definition of intermittent fasting, if you would.
Okay. I mean, so the basic definition is just, intermittent fasting would be going for a period of time at a excessive calorie deficit. There's different periodizations you can do, but most of the time when you're really talking about intermittent fasting, you're talking about either a day or multiple days at very little calories that wouldn't really be sustainable for the long run. And then you would have the intermittent would be followed by normal calorie to meet your metabolic rate, or just slightly above to kind of refuel almost. And so that period of fasting would be the obviously intermittent. So it's fasting, then refueling, fasting, refueling, and going about that as periodization. And then you have your different now it's kind of broken down where it's like 5 days of regular eating, then 2 days of fasting. That person can pick their 2 days, or they do like a alternate day where one day you eat normal diet, your next day you're fasted, say like 500 calories a day. And then so it's normal calories, 500 calories, just on and on and on. And now they've even have now they've broken it down to the daytime fastings where you're just eating in a certain window. So say you want to eat breakfast, and so you eat at 8 a.m., but then you stop at like 4 p.m. So you have a 8-hour window, and you're going 16 hours, without food. So, and people can kind of play around with, different people will have like, oh, I'm going to eat from 10 to 8 p.m., or noon to 8 p.m. and kind of do it that way. And some people do 12 hours on, 12 hours off. It's just, now there's all kinds of different, you can look in, different diet trend books and see, examples of all kinds of different diets.
Right on. We've got, like you said, all sorts of intervals of intermittent fasting, but for athletes that are training, we're basically we're talking about squeezing in our caloric intake for a day. So can you touch on that for a second? What would be ideally the caloric intake? Let's just start with the basic caloric intake. If we weren't running, how many calories should we be getting per day?
I mean, if you look at the RDAs, they're usually around like 1,500 for women, 2,000 for men, or, younger men, 2,500, younger women, maybe 2,000, somewhere in that range. So you usually have anywhere from 1,500 to 2,500 to, for most people, is going to be your range for calories for a day. And so when you're doing fasting, you're looking usually around 500 calories or less for like, if you're doing a completed fasting day. So you're really at a very low calorie intake. So you might just be snacking on a couple of things throughout the day. And then that's on a fasted day. So like your normal intake would be still like, so let's just say the typical 2,000 calorie day, like you're going to see on all like nutrition facts labels. So like, say if you're doing alternate day fastings, you would say hit 500 calories one day, 2,000 calories the next, 500, 2,000. And typically realistically, when you have the normal day, you're probably more likely going to be eating like 2,200, 25. You're probably going to eat a little bit more than your regular amount, but you're still going to be at a total calorie deficit. At least in most studies will show that, like, when especially alternate fasting, you eat a little bit more just naturally, because you went from a fasted state to you're trying to refuel yourself and kind of make up. I mean, obviously you don't make up for all the calories, and that's kind of the benefit. So you're at a total calorie deficit overall, like when you start adding it up. And so people will usually try to prefer that rather than trying to say your normal calorie intake is 2,000 and you want to lose weight. The normal recommendation is to go 500 calories less a day, for a pound of weight loss a week. And so you would eat 1,500 calories for that week. And so if you kind of average it out, if you're doing, the alternated day, it comes out to about the same as like a continuous calorie restriction type of diet.
That was 1,500 calories a day, right?
Yeah. So like if your needs were 2,000, then you would eat like 1,500 every day for that continuous calorie deficit. Where like as an alternate day, you're kind of eating a normal diet, and then you're just doing it, kind of making up and doing like 500 calories. So you're actually at 1,500 less. And it usually ends up balancing out because that next day when you refuel, you're probably going to end up like 25. So it's almost equal. Like in a lot of studies versus intermittent fasting versus just continuous calorie deficit, they show about the same amount of weight loss in both. Adherence to some of the protocols are sometimes easier on the intermittent fasting diets. Sometimes not. It kind of gets down to preferences of how people like to, when they're trying to lose weight, what they prefer almost.
Okay. Now let's throw exercise into there. Okay, so we were talking about, if for myself, 42-year-old male, we're talking about basically, the kind of the baseline is 2,000 calories for me. Now I exercise, right? I go out and I run. I go out and run an hour. I burn whatever, probably 800 calories, we'll say, right? What do I have to make up that deficit as well? Should that be made up, or how does that work within intermittent fasting?
Well, so when you get down to athletes and intermittent fasting, and if you're trying to, like for you, like, if you take an example of somebody trying to lose weight and trying to use exercise to help them lose weight, then it would, you would still want, say, like that, maybe that puts you up to 2,800 calories. Like you said, maybe that added 800 calories for the day. On a typical person, then you would still literally just go 500 less. So then you would go so your average intake would be 2,300. And then you would really want to play around again with like the macronutrients. And that would be where, working with somebody would help, because, increasing your protein intake, maybe not eating a moderate amount of fat, making sure you're having sufficient carbohydrates to, hold on to muscle synthesis and, keep your fat-free mass. Those types of things would need to be looked at. But that would be how a continuous calorie restriction works out. If you were still doing the intermittent fasting and trying to put exercise into it, it would still be basically you would eat like your 28 to 3,000 calories for your on day, and then you would still only be eating like your 500 calories for your off day. We can kind of get into it, but these complete days of fasting, there's not too many studies, especially on endurance athletes, as far as like, the 2 days, like say 5 days on, 2 days off, or alternate days. Most of the studies are done looking just at weight loss, and overweight and obese people. And so when you're really talking about training, and if like, your athletes or you yourself, if you're going every day, it's going to be hard to perform when like on, the day after you're eating only 500 calories, you're not refueling enough for that next day. And so you'll probably feel more fatigued. Your legs, you didn't recover as well. Is it doable? If you were working with somebody, maybe those are like your light days. Like maybe your shakeout, 2-3 miles, or, yoga days just for stretching, and you could kind of work around like that. But, we can get into it, I guess, in a little bit, but I usually wouldn't recommend all day fastings for athletes, just because of that. We're trying to, train and perform and increase our muscles and our endurance capabilities, while maybe some people losing weight or maintaining weight, depending on what your goals are.
Right. So that's where we would talk more about doing like the maybe 16 hours fasted, 8 hours of consumption, if you will. Is that for the athlete would be more realistic?
Yeah, I would go with something like that, and then I would take that window. So say if you like to work out in your mornings, like say if you're a morning athlete and you get up and you're working out at 5 a.m. I would typically have you then do your 8-hour window after you get done with your run. So that would be like your maybe 7 to 3 p.m. 7 a.m. in the morning to 3, depending on how long your workout is. That way you're kind of maximizing your recovery after your workouts. If you were more of a late night person, then maybe you're doing like the noon to 8 p.m. and taking in the calories there. That way you're kind of surrounding your calories around your workouts to kind of optimize your carbohydrate intake and your protein intake at that same time.
Let's go back for a second and just touch on caloric burn. So now when somebody goes out and exercises, let's say, let's just take running, because we all know running. If I go out and run, I am going to burn typically a consistent amount of calories per mile. Is that correct? Not per hour?
Yeah. Most of them are done per mile. The rule of thumb is usually like, 90 to 100 calories per mile. Now, if your typical mile is 8-minute mile, and all of a sudden you're doing tempo runs and you're running 5:36-minute miles, you're going to be burning more calories at those high intensity miles versus like, say, if you're just going out for like your easy, recovery run and you're doing like 10-minute miles, you're not going to be burning as many calories. And also as well trained as you are. So somebody, like your runners or you who's been training, they've been running for 20 plus years, you've become more efficient at it. So you're not going to burn as many calories per mile as, say, somebody getting off the couch and running 1 mile. They're going to be, burning because they're not as efficient as, you are at, running that 1 mile.
Right. Okay. And for the record, I'm not an intermittent faster.
Okay. Yeah.
I just want to put that out there.
Okay. Yeah.
So thus far, we've talked about one of the big benefits that people seek out of using intermittent fasting is weight loss. And now, is there any other benefits that you can say people can gain by intermittent fasting?
I think the biggest benefit is going to be your weight loss and more control. And with weight loss, anytime you need to lose weight and are able to lose weight, there's plenty of studies that show losing weight helps with blood pressure, helps with cholesterol levels, helps with blood sugar control. All those are going to be also benefits once you start losing weight. It's, intermittent fasting can be a tool, just like anything. It's still going to be, it's usually going to help you be at a calorie deficit because you're shortening your window of intake. And it going to gives you rules around how you should be eating. So it's a tool that you can use to help you lose weight. And so that's really where the benefit comes. Some people find it easier to follow. Some people find it harder to follow. It's really kind of your personality type. For me, I personally like rules. I make all kinds of rules on how I eat, how I, invest my money. I follow certain things just in general. Like, I'm that type of person where, that it helps me to, kind of set guidelines for my own self, just, throughout. But other people don't like it. Other people want to, kind of know what to eat and not really worry about what timing and things like that. So it's kind of your personality, and yeah, it's just going to be something you can use to help you, be at that calorie deficit. And, it's, we can get, I don't know if you want to talk about the training aspect now or when it would be more appropriate to be at a calorie deficit.
Yeah, go for it.
Really when you're at these calorie deficits, it's, and you're trying to lose weight, it's probably beneficial to do it more in your base training phases. When you're trying to build your intensities or your durations of your runs, and your races aren't getting close, because you can kind of afford to be a little bit more fatigued. And if you're kind of fueling right, it won't hurt as bad. Your body is bad. You can set a little bit better adaptations. But as you get closer to your goal races, you really don't want to be going in undernourished. You want to be making sure you're topped off. And so, there's a couple strategies. You can do the, kind of intermittent dieting, which is like you're on a calorie restriction for, 2 or 3 weeks. And then you take, like, say your peak week of training, you go into a regular calorie, or like they call it U-calorie. So your normal, your calorie efficient diet. So you kind of go like calorie deficit, and then like your peak week of training, go to a normal calorie diet. And then you can kind of go back into your deficit and then back, and kind of work it along with the training plan. And then as you're getting closer to your goal race, then it would just be trying to stay into a normal calorie, hitting your needed calories. So you're maximizing your training and you're ready to go for your races.
Cool. Going back to the benefits, one thing that I hear, some people that have worked with intermittent fasting is they feel a level of clarity after the fast, or mental acuity. Is there anything behind that?
Yeah, there actually is. It's hormone release. I'm blanking on the hormone, but during fasted, you can actually, your body will start to release a hormone that kind of gives you a sense of euphoria. It's kind of a survival mechanism. Think about it like, in the Paleolithic time, if you're going without food and you're constantly starving and you're trying to search, you need energy to go keep looking for food. So it's kind of beneficial, if you think about it, to have a little bit of like optimism and euphoria when you're really hungry because you want to keep, searching. And so your body's adapted to, when you're in a starvation mode, to kind of, give you that, euphoria, and you feel enlightenment, or however we want to describe it. But that is a thing. So I don't know if it's, I don't know really. I mean, yeah, it doesn't last forever. It's not gonna.
Right.
It's not. You're not gonna keep being starving, and you're not just being in a euphoric state forever. I mean, it will go away if you keep persisting at it. But yeah, there is a certain time point where you're going to have that feeling.
Cool. Right on. So let's just start with let's talk about the potential negatives or downsides of intermittent fasting. What kind of go ahead? What kind of side effects or negatives do you find with this?
Well, I mean, anytime that you have any type of chronic disease, especially say diabetes, you really want to talk with your doctor about doing any type of intermittent fasting. I mean, if you think about just diabetes in general, especially if you're on any like insulin medications or something that's helping you control your blood sugars, if you don't tell your doctor that you're going to do it, and they don't try to like work with you to maybe stop your medication for that day or something, those drugs are designed to lower your blood sugars, and all of a sudden you're not eating, they're going to lower your sugar that might be normal and then put you into a hypoglycemic state, and, which could be fatal. So that's something you really don't want to do. And in the literature, there really is no set scenario for how you should administer medications for diabetes. So they really don't want you doing intermittent fasting if you have diabetes, just because you are such at risk for like going hypoglycemic during those times. So that's, so if you're type 1, type 2, it's probably not going to be for you. Maybe doing the, daytime restricted, you could work it that way. But definitely the all-day fastings are probably not something that you want to attempt. And if you are, then you really want to be making sure you're talking with your doctor and working with your medical providers. And the same thing with any type of medications. Medications are, some are meant to be taken with food, some are not. But most medications are assuming we're eating regular diet. So if you are taking any medications, again, you want to talk with your doctor. Don't take this as medical advice, obviously. But talking with them, that's why there's recommendations for medications that say this medication take with food, this medication don't take with food, this medication don't have grapefruit, because it changes the absorption rate for medications. So anytime you're taking those types of things, you want to make sure you're definitely working with your medical provider and letting them know that you're thinking about doing this, and maybe they need to change your type of medications or something like that. So those can be negative side effects if you're not, working with somebody. Just for like performance standpoint, if you are doing these, all day fasted, again, like we kind of talked about earlier, they can, negatively impact your performance for that day, because you're going in fatigued and you're not fueling well enough to, hit your high notes on the workouts, and you're just going to be lacking a little bit of energy. So, and which could hurt your training, because you're not going to be able to train as hard those days. So, that can be one of the negative. But those are like the main things I would see that would be the negatives of intermittent fasting.
Cool. All right. So let's say that somebody is turned on to intermittent fasting, and they're having success with losing weight. They get to their goal weight, and now they want to retain, obviously, that goal weight. Would they stay on intermittent fasting, or how do you feel about that?
Like I said, I mean, if that's been working for you and you want to hit your now goal weight and you just want to increase your calories appropriately, you can still do it. I mean, like if that's worked for you and you feel good on it, excuse me, I wouldn't disagree with them going with it. You just want to make sure that you're now, once you hit your goal weight, that we're now kind of hitting your appropriate calories per day, and we're not staying in a calorie deficit. So whether you're doing intermittent fasting or just eating a regular diet, either way, we want to be doing, we want to be hitting our required calories a day. And, with that, you want to be hitting your proteins and your carbs and your fats and, appropriately. And so you know, I guess that would be the other thing too, when you're thinking about it, when you are at a calorie deficit, you really want to prioritize protein first, because there's enough studies that show that anytime you're doing a calorie deficit, you're going to lose not only fat, you're going to lose fat-free mass. So you're going to lose muscle. To help not lose as much muscle, you want to increase your protein. So like normal recommendations for, adequate calorie diets are, say maybe 1.5 to 2.0 for like, really active people. Whereas if you're at a calorie deficit, say you're doing 500 calories less a day, you're really looking to hit that protein of like 2.0 to 2.6, in that range. And that's per kilogram. So say I'm 170 pounds, give or take. That's like 77, something like that, kilograms. So like say I would be like, just rounding off my head, like 150, 160 grams of protein a day. And then you would try to space that out for maximum utilization throughout the day and within your window if you're doing the intermittent fasting. And then really you want to kind of limit your fat, because fat has more calories. But to also help with muscle synthesis, you want carbs, because carbs are going to help fuel your muscles. But they're also, carbs put you at an anabolic state, so they help help you grow and gain muscle, whereas fats aren't going to give you those. So anytime you're at a calorie deficit, you kind of want high protein intake, kind of like maybe like 0.5 grams per kilogram of body weight for fat, and then you want to fill in the rest with your carbs. And you want to make sure you're eating, obviously you want eating healthy carbs and, fiber. And, if you're eating lots of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, you can eat a decent amount of those foods and still be kind of, the volume of food can still be there, but not be at that many calories. Cool. And that's how you would kind of want to macronutrient it during like a calorie deficient phase.
Cool. All right. So let's take a case where the person has lost weight, but they can't seem to, they plateau, and they can't seem to go beyond that and reach, their goal weight, which let's define their goal weight as a healthy weight. They're not trying to go too much, they're not trying to go too far. They're trying to get down to a healthy weight, but they're just stagnant and they can't seem to notch it down any further with intermittent fasting. What do you suggest at that point?
Well, what's probably going on is, say you're at, like we talked about, say you're at, you need 2,000 calories a day for your current weight and you want to lose weight. So you'd start doing 1,500 calories a day. Well, as you're losing weight, you're gradually your weight loss will be slower and slower, because as you lose weight, your calorie needs per day are actually going down as well. So like say you're at, 150 pounds or 200 pounds, and you're, we're just throwing out numbers, but you need 2,000 calories. And so you're at 1,500. When you hit like say 180, and maybe your goal weight was to get down to 170. Well, once you get to 180, maybe now your nutrient needs are around that 1,500 mark. So to technically keep losing weight, then you would have to decrease your calories another 400 to 500 down to like 1,100 a day. Is that so? Like you're basically, just because this was working to help you lose weight initially because you were at a calorie deficit, now you've lost the weight and you need less calories to maintain your current body weight, but you're eating the same amount. So therefore you're maintaining the weight because you're eating the same amount to sustain your current weight. So you need to drop your calories again to help you keep losing weight. And so that's really why people plateau, because they don't realize, they're like, I'm eating the same amount. I've been eating less than I was, initially. Well, that's great. That's great. You lost that 20 pounds, but to keep losing, you're going to have to either increase your exercise to, increase your metabolism and your energy output, or you're going to have to decrease your calories in again.
And how do they figure that out? Is that something they would have to consult with a person such as yourself, the doctor, or is there something they can refer to, an online resource?
There's calorie calculators like the Mifflin St. George, Harris Benedict. The Mifflin St. George is probably the most popular one. And I think we talked about that in the last one. And you'll notice, like, the weight really changes the calorie needs the most. So like you put in your age, your height, and your weight, and it spits you out what your resting metabolic rate would be, or basically at your rate for just to sustain life. That's what you would need to eat. And then you would put your activity factor in there. So like for somebody that's really active, maybe like 1.6, and somebody that's just doesn't move around the house, maybe 1.1 to 1.2. Not very sedentary mostly. And so you times your that first number they give you times that activity factor, and that gives you your calorie needs a day. And then as your weight changes, you would just have to keep updating that. So like you would see it, like, so you could even go around and play in there, put in like, okay, I want to be, I'm 200 pounds now. I could put in like, what is it that to get me down to 180, or what would I need, what sustains me at 180, and things like that. So that's kind of, so you could just have to keep playing with those. I mean, you can definitely talk with a dietitian, but you can find those resources online if you're just looking to play around with numbers.
Would that also give you your ideal weight? So, again, going back to what we were saying earlier about, people sometimes trying to lose too much weight. Is there a way to know what's one's ideal weight?
Yeah. Well, they have equations for that too. Like for men, the ideal weight equation is, 106, plus 6 pounds for every inch over 5 feet you are. So say I'm 6 foot. So 12 times 6 is 72, plus, the 106 is 178. And then you kind of take a plus or minus 10%. So that'd be 160 to 196 would be for me, for being 6 foot tall, your ideal weight is 160 to 196. That's a general equation that gives you like kind of a ballpark. Somebody who has a small bone structure, who's 6 foot, or a little on the slender build, maybe they're on the smaller side. On somebody with a bigger bone structure, broader shoulders, things like that, they might be on the heavier side. And then you can also look at your BMI, so that takes your height and your weight into effect. If you're an athlete, runners are usually going to be, within that BMI because we're leaner. But maybe like a football player or a bodybuilder or, a power lifter, they could be healthy, but they're going to their BMIs are going to be probably put them in the overweight category, even though, say you're like a professional football player, you could be, 4 or 5%, body fat, and the doctor would look at you, just if you looked at just the BMI, they would tell you you're overweight, which anybody looking at him with their eyes would know that he's not overweight or she's not overweight, things like that. So I mean, you got to take some of those with a grain of salt about how much muscle you actually have, and but you can definitely find, for somebody just looking for where they're around where they should be, those ideal body weight equations and your BMI are good. I mean, that's what for the general population are great. And like I said, for runners, those it works pretty well for runners too, because they're gonna, most runners are obviously going to be leaner.
Cool. So you have, as we kind of talked about, your education and background. You look at the science behind IF, and do you feel it is a healthy way to lose weight?
I don't really like honestly, I don't think the full days fasting would be the way to go. Like I really wouldn't try, unless somebody really wanted to try it and their only goal was to lose weight and they weren't really active. Like I said, it could be a tool and it might help them. I personally, if I'm going to do it, I don't mind the time restricted one during the day, because you're still eating through the day. You can still space your meals. You can work it around your workout timing. And you can also, the other thing to think about is your own circadian rhythm. There are studies now that show that, in the morning where you're more, your body's getting ready to go, you actually use more of like the carbs to store as muscle, whereas later at night you actually store more fat, which kind of makes sense. You're going to bed, your body's ready not to be active, so they're going to store it more as fat. Whereas in the morning you are getting ready, so you store more, glycogen in the muscles, those types of things. So maybe even like working with, your own circadian rhythm about how you feel to kind of, to time it around that, that would take a little bit more, like, when do you usually go to bed? What time do you usually wake up? How do you feel in the morning? Are you using alarm clocks and things like that to kind of time it? But yeah, I don't mind the intermittent fasting because it's really just about calorie control. It's really, it really is just a tool to help people, not overeat is really the main goal of it. So if it's going to help you and you're doing it appropriately and still eating, a high quality diet with, vegetables, adequate, protein, healthy fats, things like that, then it's definitely usable and it can be used for people's gains. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, is there a healthier alternative to intermittent fasting?
The alternative really is just eating, following a healthy diet in general. Really the intermittent fasting is strictly to help with, they've tried to look at, there is maybe a little bit better diet adherence, like to, for some people on the intermittent fasting, like I said, as far as like just helping you control, your calories in. There hasn't really been much study to show that it was like, it hasn't really shown to be helpful in, holding on to fat-free mass or anything like that. Or keeping up your metabolism up. That was one of the things that people thought it might do. If you're fasting and then reintroducing food, your metabolism would remain higher. And then you might have an initial spike, of increase in metabolism or your hormones going back up, but they're not long. So it's anytime you're at a calorie deficit, you're going to, go into a little bit of hormonal changes, and your metabolism will start to slow. So yeah, so a tool. It's a tool.
Okay, perfect. So let's talk a little bit more about the hormonal changes, because we had discussed earlier before we started recording. Jason Coop on his podcast, Coopcast, had talked with two female dietitians about intermittent fasting, and they had both cautioned women against it. But you looked through some research, and what did you find?
Well, so I know you sent me that. So I tried to, I went on a couple different, databases to look through studies, and, maybe I was looking in the wrong search criteria, but I couldn't really find anything specifically with outcomes for women and hormonal balances, in specific to intermittent fasting. I do know that just being at a calorie deficit, and if you're at an extreme calorie deficit, for men and women, but particularly women with menstrual cycles, your hormone balances are going to be changed. So if you're, it used to be called the female athlete triad, was when, low body mass, low bone density, amenorrhea. Now they've changed it to REDS, which is reduced energy deficit syndrome, which is because men and women can both have, be at reduced energy deficits. And this can play havoc on all types of, your hormones and your body regulations, temperature control, so yeah, anytime you're going at a severe calorie restriction, it's something to be cautious of. And yeah, women, I could definitely see where they would be coming from. Like I said, I wouldn't doubt it if they found the studies and they have them, but I personally didn't find any specific relating to intermittent fasting. But just knowing what I know about, extreme calorie deficits and women in general, which can cause hormone imbalances, I could definitely see it not being beneficial if it was taken too extreme.
Cool. Transitioning a little bit, if we talk about intermittent fasting, sometimes the conversation diverts into talking about a fat adapted diet. How did the two correlate, if at all?
I don't know if they correlate so much. I know we were going to talk about like fasted versus like ketogenic.
Yep.
If you're intermittent fasting, you might be doing more fasted runs, and therefore you could have maybe you become maybe a little bit better fat adapted during those runs. But I wouldn't really say they're interchangeable, because it's not like you're on the intermittent fasting, you necessarily have to be following a specific type of diet. I know, a lot of people think, intermittent fasting and keto go together, but they're really, again, intermittent fasting is just about your timing of meals. It doesn't necessarily specify what you're eating. Whereas like a fat adapted, fat adapted is being better at utilizing your fat for energy, which is actually different from just a ketogenic diet. A ketogenic diet will help you get fat adapted, but doesn't necessarily, but being, better fat adapted doesn't necessarily mean you're on a ketogenic diet. So I guess that's like one of those word plays,
Yeah.
But
okay, can you find differences? Is there distinct differences between the two?
Well, yeah. So fat adaptation is literally how your body utilizes fat, during the day. So like when you break down your fat to use it as energy, there's a process it has to go through. So the more fat adapted you are, the more efficient it is using that fat to turn into, for energy. When you're in a ketogenic diet, that's the goal, is to be burning fat as your primary energy source. Whereas usually you're just going to be in a carb/fat burning state. So as you become more fat adapted, you're burning more calories at a higher percentage. Like your energy use is going to be higher from fat than carbohydrates. And that's kind of where the ultra runners think that it's going to be good for them to be more fat adapted, which in an instance it will because especially in ultras where you're going for a long time, to be able to utilize your fat more efficiently, in theory is going to help you perform better because you're at such a low aerobic threshold. And that's the other thing. You hear about like aerobic, anaerobic, and it's like everybody knows anaerobic you're using all carbs, and people think aerobic you're using fat. Well, at any one point, your total anaerobic state, I think, can only last for like 8 to 10 seconds, like at all out max. So pretty much any time below that, you're going to be using some type of combination of fat and carbohydrates. So you're always kind of burning a little bit of both. So like I said, the more fat adapted you get, the bigger the fat utilization is going to be over the carb, the percentage wise.
Right. So yeah, we start in the lactic system. You said 10 seconds. That's burning glycogen, and then we kind of switch over and go aerobic if we're just going out for a run. So those first 8 to 10 seconds we start burning, and then the heart rate kind of jacks up, and then once the heart rate kind of stabilizes, then we start going into more of an aerobic system, and that's where we start choosing which we're going to burn. Are we going to burn carb? Are we going to burn fat? And that's where we start talking about like fat adaptation, right? And
right.
So now, is that the reality that if we go into that aerobic zone and we're training ourselves? Touch on that for a second. How do we train ourselves to use the fat burning rather than the glycogen burning, or
So this is where a lot of the more literature now is coming out about training low, you'll hear, and this is just training on a lower energy. And there is, they have shown that like the more you say you go out in your morning at your 5 a.m. and you don't eat anything before, since you've already been fasted, your body's you're basically practicing fat adaptation and better fat utilization at those times. Because anytime you're going to take in carbohydrates, say you take in carbs right before a run and then go out the door and run, you're going to use that exogenous source, that first, that you've been taken first. So you're not really going to, get the benefit of like a fat adaptation. So, and there, like I said, there has been some, studies now to show that like fasted runs or like even like double, say you do, like I know Lewis Burke she's got all kinds of research on ketogenic diets and fat adaptation. And even one of her recommendations in a recent paper I read was to, do a double, and then basically, maybe do like your sprint workout with a carb source, like say you're doing like your hard tempo, and then don't really refuel all the way. And then later that day, go out like on just an easy training run. And that way you're kind of going out on another depleted run. And that will help like increase your fat utilization. And there was even, I should have looked the guy's name up, but Sean Bearden on Science of Ultra just had a podcast with a gentleman who was looking at mitochondria effects on low running, and how that low energy runs actually help improve mitochondria function, which those are like your powerhouse that help produce ATP. And so there is more science coming out to show that there are benefits of doing like fasted running to become a little bit better fat adapted, or in that case, which I need to go read the paper because I was pretty intrigued by it, but how the mitochondria are being, the functionality of them are improving on these types of runs. And that's really, you don't necessarily be in a ketogenic diet, like already in a fat. You just need to kind of be in a fasted state or at a low calorie deficit. Because like I said, anytime if you fuel right before your run and you're trying to do these types of runs, you're kind of missing the point, because you're going to be using those carbohydrates right away. And so like just to kind of put it into perspective, these are going to be what you want for your base building again. Like, these would be like, when you're kind of farther out from your A race and you really want to start, adapting a little bit better. And, you would go out, say you're not eating as frequently, or you're going, maybe even go a little longer. I think last time I said anything over an hour and a half, you really want to be, fueling. If you're in your base phase and you really want to try to get that fat adaptation, you could probably go up to 2 hours if you want, without eating anything, and just to, you practice that fat adaptation. But anytime you start getting closer to your race, you want to make sure you're fueling appropriately, so you're recovering well, so you can keep hitting it hard and feeling refreshed. And also B, you want to be training your gut. So, because on your race, you're not going to go 2 hours at a time without eating. And your gut's just like a muscle. So, you want to make sure you're training that. So as you're getting closer, it's more beneficial for your performance to be training the gut and practicing your fueling strategies rather than trying to be fat adapted. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
Let's talk about two sides of the spectrum. We just had a pretty amazing, I don't know if you saw, Michael McKnight went out and ran 100 miles solely on water. No calories, no nothing, just pure water. Now he's been, doing fat adaptation in his training and such. So he's been practicing, his consumption is dialed in so that he is going to be using fat as his fuel, according to him. Now, is that okay for the body? I mean, I know 100 miles is not okay for the body in general, but let's, just for those that saw it and were intrigued, is that something that, a person, such as yourself would say, that's probably, there's 1% that can probably do that and should do that? Or, is it a larger number that perhaps, could do that? And then let's also, go ahead with that and I'll ask you another question.
Yeah. I mean, one person obviously doing something doesn't make, a valid way to do something. Did he train? I mean, I don't know what I'm sure he kept a very low aerobic threshold for his, maybe it seemed fast for people. I don't know what he ran it in, but I know like Zach Bitter and his, like 24-hour, efforts and being fat adapted, they seem fast, but for him, that can run like a 4-minute mile, running a 7-minute mile is at aerobic threshold. So it's like
he's also taking in carbs.
Zach Bitter takes in more carbs than which most people realize. But this guy, it's I can't really say scientifically what that would do to your body. I wouldn't imagine it's great. Just like you said, running 100 miles in general isn't going to be all that great for your body. Not to mean fasted like that. I mean, think about it. Like how could you even design a study like that? You know what I mean? Like, how are you going to get enough people to run 100 miles without eating anything to even study it? That's definitely the case of study of one right there.
Yes, Ed of one.
So,
right.
Yeah, what is? I mean, I couldn't even. I mean, I'm sure his body was all, just even. I'd even be curious about his sodium, his electrolyte levels, his glycogen depletion. I mean, I don't know. There's all kinds of things.
Yeah. I just want to alert people that, there are other things that can be going on that we're not aware of. Like, it's not,
right.
Even if you train for fat adaptation, that's probably not the best thing to do to your body. Like,
no,
these things. And I just want to start swinging that pendulum back, and let's go into the topic of Zach Bitter and Jeff Browning. Because we just touched on it. Those guys, if you listen to them and they talk about their, yes, they are practicing fat adaptation, but they're also using carbs as a source in their ultra marathons, in their races, because they need those as well. They are still burning glycogen throughout this. It may not be the numbers that some of us that aren't as fat adapted burn, but they are still burning some. So they still do need that source, and it's a quick energy source as well. Can you kind of touch on that balance as well? That, yes, you may be fat adaptation, have that fat adaptation, but, due to the course of any athletic endeavor, whether it be ultramarathon or, sub ultra, you're still going to need some other sources.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, whenever you're in a race, fat utilization, say from an exogenous source, by the time you ingest it, it takes usually about 2 to 3 hours to start being able to process it and use it as energy. Whereas carbohydrates, it's, within 10, 15 minutes, you can start using that as, your energy source once you ingest it. And then, fat also, just for gut, fat takes longer to empty from your stomach. So just from how your gut feels, like taking in more fat during a race might not be the best thing. And they do show studies that if you are more fat adapted and used to eating more fat, you'll start, you process it faster. Basically, you've been eating that way, your body's got accustomed to it, so you can, process it a little faster. But you're right. Like, even Zach Bitter's taken in, I don't know as much about Browning, but I remember listening to an interview with Zach Bitter. This was probably 4 or 5 years ago, after he just set the 24-hour record for the first time. He was on a podcast called Endurance Planet, and he said he took in, he averages on his harder training days about 150 grams of carbohydrate a day. And anybody who's on a keto diet would hear that and be like, well, that's a lot of carbs, because that's not what somebody would typically think, but he's doing that because he's trying to do it for performance. There's a difference between performance and just doing something. Like you said, that one guy, was his name Knight?
Michael McKnight.
Michael McKnight. So he did it. Was that his optimum performance though? We would never know, but I would guess that he could probably run faster and perform better if he was taking in fuel sources. So it's kind of one of those things, was he doing it just to prove a point? This is what the body is capable of, which is cool. I mean, it's kind of always cool to see what a person in the body is capable of. And that's why we kind of like to run 100 miles and, push our limits to see what we can do with it. But if we're looking at the aspect of performance, then why are we doing it? Why is this going to help me reach my ultimate goal of running fastest, or hitting my fastest marathon time or ultra marathon time? Am I out here just to go ahead?
So Jeff Browning is very open. He is a GU athlete, which obviously is a glucose based product. So he goes to the GU Energy labs and has the testing done to say, okay, I am burning this much fat, but I also need to burn this much glycogen. So how do I fuel my body so that I get the optimal performance? And that's how he's performing on such a high level, is, he's using his complete system, if you will, he's burning fat, yet he's also burning glycogen, and using the two systems together to make the most efficient performance and as he can. So I love listening to him talk about the combination of the two, because primarily his diet is fat adapted, but he talks about when he uses carbohydrates within his diet to help him on the days, kind of like we were talking about earlier. He knows he has a longer run, so he's going to need a little bit more carbohydrates in that run. So he may have like a sweet potato or something like that to help fuel that run. So, even these high performing athletes that we kind of visualize as total fat adapted athletes, they're using, carbohydrates effectively and efficiently because they want to make sure that they have their optimal performance. And I agree with you. I don't think Michael McKnight was trying to have the optimal performance. I think he was trying to show us the potential of human ability to run in a fat adapted state solely on water, which is an amazing accomplishment of itself. Now, I agree with you that, optimally, he probably could have ran a lot faster had he had any calories.
Yeah.
So, the point is, like, I just want people to understand that, you don't have to be strictly in a ketogenic state in order to perform. These guys that are toting these fat adapted and ketogenic diets are also using carbohydrates in a way that benefits them. I think we get caught up in, I'm solely fat adapted. It's kind of like you have this like stamp on you, like, I am fat adapted and ketogenic.
Yeah. So have you seen Twitter? It's exactly how it is.
I try to stay away from Twitter. Yeah. So, and exactly right. We kind of put it out there and it's just like this, badge of honor. But honestly, if you want to have a higher level of performance, let's even go further on the pendulum and get to sub ultra. And let's talk about marathon, 5K to marathon. If those people were solely on a ketogenic or a fat adapted diet, let's talk about performance there. How would that affect, now we're going into an anaerobic state. In the 5K, potentially up to the marathon, depending on how fast you're running, where your body wants to go into that glycolytic burning state. So can you talk about that for a moment?
Yeah. So anytime you're going to be doing the more high intensity, like we talked about, the higher your intensity, the more glycogen your body wants to burn. If you're constantly fat adapted, you're not training that higher end for carb utilization and glycogen. So there've actually been studies that have even shown that that the more fat adapted you are, the worse you are at burning carbohydrates at like the higher end. So your carbohydrate utilization has worsened, which might not be bad for, like you said, the ultra. But when you're talking about like a 5K or marathon or sprinting up a hill, all of a sudden you can't, switch over as well as efficiently. Right. Correct. So, for those types of athletes, and really ultra, I would say, is probably like one of the only, sports I could think of where fat adaptation really is kind of like, well, I could see where that would, increase performance. Like you look at something like basketball or, even baseball where, like basketball, you're constantly sprinting, jumping, and you constantly need those quick carbs because you're always doing just flat out sprints. Or baseball, you hit a base and you're just sprinting to first. Well, if you're constantly in like a fat adapt state, you're not going to have that higher end speed that you need for the sprint to the first base, or, to round out your triple or something like that. So any type of sport that you're going to need quick, short bursts of energy, fat adaptation is not going to be what you're looking for. You want to be looking for your peak performance at your high end. And carbohydrate diets are going to need that. And just like you said, like for the, I think it really is important to reiterate for like the, even the people that are doing fat adapted, they're still taking in carbohydrates because they know if they want to perform and, perform well, they're going to need those carbohydrates. So something like say you're doing a fast 5K, it's not like you need, you to take in carbohydrates during a 5K because it's so quick, but you want to be training where you're using carbohydrates. So when you're training and you're doing like your, your 2-minute sprints to practice your high end or, your tempos or intervals, you're not going to be able to go as hard and, utilize, anytime you train at that top end, you're practicing carbohydrate utilization. Where, if you're fat adapted, you're never gonna be efficiently, because you don't have the carbs to hit those higher points to train that way. And then if you're not really taking them in anyways, you're not going to have enough to, utilize it as efficiently. Your body wants to stay in that kind of fat. So you just don't have the ability to like you said, transfer over as well.
Sure. So, I mean, when I think about, going back what we were just going over, I in no means mean to bash, people that are trying to be fat adapted or go ketogenic. Solely, I just want to make sure that people understand that we still need to utilize carbohydrates and use them to optimize performance. And it may take a little bit more research and understanding as to how you can use those and when to plug those in. So, I mean, I think having people get a little bit more education so far as, how do you do that properly to optimize your performance, if that's the goal. They may have other goals in doing, just as, I have other goals in my diet just because of health reasons, so I don't mean to take away from that, because I'm sure there's plenty of other benefits that people can gain from, doing various types like of the intermittent fasting. We talked about that and how they can lose weight, going fat adapted, and, that they may even see a loss of weight, at the beginning as well. Is that correct? Because now you're diminishing carbohydrates. Would you see a drop off
for the ketogenic diet?
I'm sorry, if you go ketogenic diet, would you see a diminish in or a potential diminish in body weight?
Yeah, I mean, so ketogenic diets are effective at helping you lose weight. The issue you get into is if you look at a lot of studies, though, you also lose usually more fat-free mass, so muscle, on a ketogenic diet as well. So when you're losing weight, you kind of typically lose weight faster in the beginning. Like year-long studies or anything that's usually about 6 months or longer, you usually see about the same amount of weight loss in a ketogenic diet versus any calorie deficit diet. The problem is, though, like I talked about, like how carbs are helped with the anabolic response. If you're eating more fat and just protein, you're not getting the carbs for the anabolic response to help hold on to some of that, and build those muscles. That's why, like, if you're an athlete, it's still important to, even if you're on a ketogenic diet, to hit your carbs timing appropriately. After workouts would be a big one. So that you're at least adapting and helping your body adapt to the, the strength training or endurance training you're doing. So yeah, you could definitely lose weight. But again, it's, why are you doing it? I always like to ask people, like, why are you on this diet? Is it because you need structure and you want to follow rules and you think you can follow this for a while? Or is it like, if somebody's, is it because you think it's going to help you perform better? So like, what's kind of the purpose? Like any diet, you do, is what's the purpose? Why are we doing this? Is there a medical reason? Like you said, there's plenty of reasons why people need to change their diet for, other reasons besides weight loss. But it's really like, why are we going to do it? Is it going to help me reach my goals? And if so, like, how can I do it to the healthiest, maximum, healthiest, potential? And, even with the ketogenic diet, when you're working with people, it's not all just, bacon and cheese and, like, you really need to be eating a lot of non-starchy vegetables in there. Your plate should still be full of salads and, asparagus and just all, cauliflowers and broccoli. You should be eating a wide plethora of vegetables because they're low in carbohydrates, but they're high in fiber, high in micronutrients. And those are the types of, a lot of people just want to get on like the, say like I don't know if you've heard the carnivore diet, which is just all meat all the time, which as a dietitian, I just I don't see how that's sustainable. Or, I mean, maybe I'll get some pushback, but, it's kind of one of those things where it's like you just eliminate everything but meat. And if you are going to do it, that even then, like you need to be make sure you're eating organ meats. Animals' livers are some have, they have enough like vitamin C and vitamin A in it to like help sustain you. Whereas like you wouldn't get that from just like, muscle meat and things like that. Your organ meats are where a lot of your micronutrients would come from. So if you ever were going to try something like that, which like I said, I don't really recommend because I think it takes way too much out, but you need to make sure at least you're trying to do it at least somewhat, intelligently, with some research behind it. But things like that, like even on a ketogenic diet, I would still recommend, maybe eating like liver a couple times a week. You don't want to eat liver too often. Like that shouldn't be your only, because livers are so potent in a lot of animals that they can actually start getting you excess vitamins. Like one of my wife always laughs at me. One of my fun facts is you can't eat a polar bear's liver because it has too much vitamin A and you can actually die from it. So, so things like that, that's, so you just got to be, like I said, why are you doing the diet? Is it going to help me perform better at what my goals are? And then how do I do it to the healthiest possible manner?
Sure. I mean, I saw one recent article, I think it was, about plant-based athletes that were trying to go ketogenic, which I would imagine that would really have some challenges. And anybody that's really trying to do that, I would imagine we want to kind of refer them to someone such as yourself, because that would create so many challenges in gaining proteins and like you said, I mean, they're going to be able to eat their vegetables, but that would be a tremendous challenge.
It might be easier vegetarian wise on a keto diet if you're looking to go like full vegan or something like that on a keto. I honestly don't really know how you would do it fully going vegan unless you're just constantly pouring like olive oil over everything and just to get your fat, up. I mean, that's, there's obviously coconut oil, but because the protein really isn't that hard. Once you get used to being like a vegan or vegetarian athlete and you get used to those types of proteins, it's not really that hard to get your protein. There are some studies that show you might want to eat more of it to help with muscle synthesis because they could be lacking in some of the amino acids. So you might, instead of needing like 25, you might want to be eating like 30, 35.
Excuse me, I should have said fats, not protein. So,
I got what you're saying, but yeah, fats are on a, more of a plant-based diet are really going to be your hard part. So I've actually talked to like one of when I was in my internship, a RD who actually ran a keto clinic for seizures, because that's what it was originally designed for. I actually talked to him about vegan and it was possible, and even he was like, I've never worked with anybody wanting to do keto and vegan. He's like, but I really just don't see how I could even like program something. Like it would just be tremendously difficult, restricting. I mean, it wouldn't be something I would recommend because you'd be, you'd be hard, pressed to actually make it work.
Sure. Cool. I think that's a good place to hit the pause button. We covered a lot of great things today. I appreciate you sharing your knowledge. Again, to everyone, we're just trying to educate here. I know this is a touchy subject, so don't send any hate mail to Jake. You can pour it on me and let me know. Again, I'm not trying to be biased or opinionated against either. Just trying to educate and provide some light onto the subject. Again, I know it's super touchy, so. But those of you that want to ask more questions or provide positive feedback to Jake, how can they reach you, buddy?
Well, I am on Facebook. You can reach out to just Jake Edmiston is what I'm on there. Twitter, I'm on, I think Jake Edmiston, or I think my tag is like mountain to molehill. And then you can always email me at edmistonrdn@gmail.com. And I like feedback. Hey, if you got some articles that that you find and you want to share with me, I'm all for that. I always like, finding new things. I mean, like, there's always new things coming out of science that are, I like reading and finding out. So just, if you do send me stuff, I read it, just be aware that I might send you something back too. We can have you can have it. I like educated debates. I don't need you just yelling at me saying that I'm wrong about. We can definitely just talk about it.
Yes. Yeah. Let's be civilized.
Obviously, like I said, Twitter's not a place to usually be civilized. You get 140 characters or whatever it is now, and most people just yell at each other saying that my diet is the only diet and it's the best diet. So
I'll put that in the show notes and make sure that we put the disclaimer that it's not for the bashing of Jake. I'll accept all bashing and shield you from that. So, Jake, thanks again for your time there, my friend. Always, I learned so much in our conversations. I'm sure we'll pick up another one. Perhaps we can go a little bit more into how to be a little bit more well-rounded in plant-based diets. I've kind of gone more that direction myself, just because of health reasons for for a condition I have in my throat, and it's really done a tremendous job in helping me with that. So perhaps we can talk about that next time. So,
sounds good.
I hope you stay well and stay safe, my friend. Please say hello to your wife and your little one. And as always, enjoyed our time.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I enjoy our conversations.